Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. This is a program where we take interesting twists and turns off of the road of life. And today I think we're going to have a specific interesting twist and turn because I get to interview one of my friends and former colleagues, somebody I used to teach with at Tacoma Community College, Dan Enbysk. And we both have an interest in a certain movie, and that movie is Dark City. And we're going to use our time today on Anomalies to talk about Dark City. So, Dan, how are you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
Yeah,
How have you been?
yeah, well, for an old guy, I just turned 74, so I think I'm doing okay. So let's talk a little bit about, tell us about what you're studying, and then we're going to see if we can tie that into Dark City.
Yeah, so as you said, we used to teach together and we taught politics and sociology. And I became more and more interested in my teaching over time with questions that were, I suppose, more soulful, um, more mythological. And I had never really learned much about mythology, hadn't really studied psychology per se. Um, but these felt like pressing questions for me. And I began kind of searching for places where might learn more about that. And consequently, I ended up at Pacifica Graduate Institute down in Southern California outside Santa Barbara. Um, where their orienting kind of philosophy is geared towards depth psychology. So, learning about the soul, learning about the unconscious, studying dreams. But the particular program that I'm in that actually has a lot to do with all that is called Mythological Studies with an emphasis in depth psychology. And it's a master's PhD program. So just this last month, in fact, I graduated out of the master's part of the program and I'm now in the PhD part of the program and hopefully working towards dissertation conceptualization in the spring and then working on the dissertation.
Well, congratulations. Anybody who furthers their education, I think that's a positive thing. Now we get to this common interest in the subject of today's podcast. We both have seen a movie called Dark City, and it
Mhm.
resonated with you, and it resonated with me, and I can share why it resonated with me. But first of all, how does Dark City relate to, and this is a film I think the director was Alex Proyas, who's an Australian director, and he directed a couple of films that I have seen and one that I haven't seen. In addition to Dark City, he directed a movie called The Crow and also I, Robot. And I haven't seen The Crow, but I've seen the other two. So, how did this connect with how did the movie Dark City connect with your academic work?
Well, I think the way that it initially connected was um, it's in the sense that it's kind of a dystopic uh, presentation, dystopic film, right? It's looking at um, a bad place, dystopia, bad place, right? And certainly, I think people that watch this film will see that, in its very name, it's a kind of a bad place, a dark place. Um, and I've always been interested in looking at that aspect of politics, these dark places, whether they're imaginary ones in fiction or in film, or the dark places in our political, sociological experiences. Um, so there have been many, uh, uh, unfortunately, over history. But there's a lot of that I think we can learn from looking into the dark, and that's, what mythology, depth psychology also um, has a desire to do is look at the full human experience, right, in its heights and in its depths. Um, and perhaps in doing that and not shying away from looking into the dark, looking into the shadows, we can learn something more about ourselves and how to go on, living with one another in ways that don't reflect, that don't represent the dark, don't represent the shadow. I know, right now we're
Now,
going through that in our
you've
country right
used
now.
used a term that I'd like you to clarify. I think you used the word depth psychology.
Mm, mm.
Tell us more about that.
So the depths would be the unconscious, right? So that aspect of the psyche or that aspect of the soul that we're not always necessarily aware of, right? But may govern, a lot of what we do, how we act, how we think, um, in our conscious lives. So, Freud, Carl Jung would be, the two figures that are really, there are more, but Freud and Jung would be the two figures that are largely responsible for making us aware from the psychological perspective of the importance of the unconscious and the things that live in there, right? The dreams, the archetypes, um, the instincts, those things that, again, we may not be aware of in our day-to-day conscious lives, but that I think we neglect, um, pretty frequently in favor of a different kind of conception of psyche, that psyche is all conscious, that it's all above water, it's all above ground, it's transparent uh, to transparent to ourselves, right? How the mind works, for example. So depth psychology seeks to look down below, right?
Mm.
It seeks to go into that underworld journey, that dark sea journey, and really confront the shadow, if it can find it, confront pathologies, where they exist, in the hopes that we can become more whole in doing so, that we can begin a process of individuation where we begin to recognize the full self and not just the self that kind of lives above ground.
Yeah, and if you have seen Dark City, you can see a lot of those connections you just talked about. So let's describe a little bit of the plot of Dark City, and some of the reviews that I've seen of the movie say don't give away too much, because part of the joy of watching Dark City, because it's a mystery, is not to give away a lot of the plot. So as I recall, it starts out with Rufus Sewell, who is a British actor. I had not seen him before in any other movie. He wakes up in an apartment by himself, and he doesn't remember who he is. And there's a body of a woman in the apartment who appears to be murdered. And then a phone rings, and the phone call is from a Dr. Schreiber, and that name takes on some significance later on. But it's
Mhm.
basically this phone call is saying to the Rufus Sewell character is, hey, there's some people coming for you. You're part of an experiment, and you need to get the hell out of there. And really, the complexity is that Sewell doesn't know who he is or what he's doing um, in this person's apartment. You think that's a pretty good description of the opening part of the movie?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would point out also that, all of those kind of themes, the idea of an amnesiac, waking up and having lost his identity, the idea that he might be being chased by some strange men, and he gets this call out of the blue or out of the dark, if you will.
Yeah,
Uh, all those are and just the setting, taking place in this kind of hotel, that's that's kind of, you know, um, it could be an anywhere kind of place, right? So there's this notion, that of alienation. All these are great like film noir themes. So, I think thinking about Dark City as kind of a neo-noir type of film, um, you know, makes a lot of sense.
It seems to me that the Kiefer Sutherland character, Dr. Daniel Schreiber, there's some significance in his name, and that character's name. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, Daniel Schreiber was, um, what was he? He was a German. I'm forgetting exactly what he was. Um, what he's famous for is this kind of account that he gives of schizophrenia.
Yeah, his own
And
mental illness, right?
schizophrenia at the time. Freud writes about him in one of Freud's works. He's probably like the most written about kind of psychiatric case in the early psychiatric literature coming out of, the early 20th century. Um, so, the directors chose to give, Kiefer Sutherland's uh, character the name Daniel Schreiber, I think, as a homage to kind of this history of early psychiatry. Um, Freud himself was actually studying more neurotics, and it was actually Carl Jung whose patients tended to have a kind of schizophrenic, what we would call schizophrenic symptoms. But still, I think it's interesting that a lot of the characters, kind of have names associated with the field of depth psychology as almost a kind of reminder of the themes that the film is dealing with. So I don't know if they have any more significance than that, but I think it's kind of a fun, kind of detail that the directors put into the film.
Yeah, and the Schreiber character tells the Rufus Sewell character, and Sewell doesn't know his name in the movie. He's not really sure who he is. So he tells the Rufus Sewell character that there are some people coming for him, and these people are strangers. So, without giving away a whole lot of the plot there, who are these strangers? What do they represent? And to me, they look like, if you've ever seen the movie Nosferatu, the
Yeah,
vampire,
yeah,
they look like that.
they do. Yeah. So, as far as we know, the strangers are these beings from another part of the universe. They're an alien kind of race, and they have a collective consciousness. Um, and they've brought, well, it's going to be hard not to give away some of the details of the
No, and
film.
go ahead. We just don't want to turn
Yeah.
off
I
people
mean, I
from
think the
seeing.
film repays like rewatching anyway. So, hopefully some of the details that we talk about help people, kind of look into things deeper. Um, but the strangers are, they have a collective consciousness. So, one of the questions that the film raises is this question of individuality, the self, and what makes, people unique, um, and what makes, for something like the soul, right? And in the film, the species we learn later, we learn that they're dying, right? For some reason, um, their species is dying, and they're seeking for some way to save themselves, and they think that the way to save themselves is to discover the human soul, right? To um, escape perhaps their collective consciousness and adapt into, an individual uh, consciousness, right? They believe that this is going to help save them. Well, the other interesting thing about the strangers is that in order to engage with the humans, they have um, taken over the corpses of humans that have passed away, and so the strangers are actually these little squid-like beings. I don't know how to really describe them, uh,
That's a pretty good description.
but they live within the dead corpses of human beings. And so that's why they have this kind of Nosferatu kind of look to them.
Right.
They're very pale, uh, almost lifeless looking, uh, and and apparently they're all male, which I think is an interesting point.
Yeah, that
Talk
had kind of
about
escaped
more.
me until you. So, what do you think the significance of that is?
Well, I mean, if we look at the history of the kind of discussion of the soul, we go far enough back, we see that the soul is uh, often described with a different word, the psyche, right? And the psyche goes back to Greek philosophy. It's this animating principle of human beings, and the psyche, um, in that sense, as an animating kind of principle or power within us, also relates to what Jung called the animus or the anima. The anima for Jung was this female kind of principle, right? It wasn't necessarily um, feminine in terms of its sexuality, but it was feminine in terms of its kind of archetypal meaning, right? So, for example, you know, every every soul or every psyche has an anima aspect and an animus aspect, but for the male, right, the aspect that often gets repressed or is unconscious is the anima, right? So that the female principle, and then for the females, it would be the animus, right? So the idea that Jung had was that um, what we need to do to individuate or become whole is become more aware of the opposite and bring the opposites together in a kind of union, right? That would be a process of individuation where we work to incorporate, as males, we work to incorporate the anima more into our conscious psyche, right? And then the opposite for females. So then the question is, what all that has to do with the soul. Well, if we're talking about the soul as kind of representative of our whole selves, then in order to, live soulfully, we need to incorporate, the parts of ourselves that we're not conscious of, or perhaps that we've repressed.
So,
So we
so
might
along,
do that by getting more in touch with our feminine sides.
yeah, along with that same idea as an intriguing thing that you pick up in the film is it's almost dark. There's no light in Dark City, and that's a metaphor. And also, every night at midnight, people go to sleep and they wake
Mm.
up sometimes with a different identity. So, what's the significance of that as you see it in this broader uh, topic that we're discussing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the darkness certainly speaks to this idea of a underworld journey or night sea journey. So Jung spoke about it, and we see in all kinds of literature where we actually take that journey across the night sea or into the depths or into the unconscious, right? To begin to confront, those things that we've repressed, those things that, we don't pay attention to, those aspects of soul or psyche that are perhaps, difficult to confront. Um, So in the film, we're confronting a question of identity, who we are, right? And who we really are, because we're dealing, with an amnesiac, right? That doesn't know who he is, right? As do none of the characters in the film, really. They don't know who they really are. They have memories of who they think they are, but of course we know in the film that the strangers, change these memories, as you said. So the question then becomes, you know, how do we begin to move in the direction of those repressed, understandings or ideas of who we are? And oftentimes, from the depth psychological view, that involves confronting some bad memories. That requires confronting some trauma, right? Um, those things that, maybe we repress because, the ego has this way of doing that to kind of protect itself, right? So the ego doesn't necessarily want to individuate. It wants to maintain itself as kind of the orienting aspect of the self. So we can see this kind of battle, I suppose. I don't know if that's the best metaphor, but this battle going on between the ego and what Jung would call the self, the whole self, which includes, the unconscious. Um, so the idea that this is set in, a city that's dark all the time, I mean, it certainly suggests this film noir, neo-noir kind of aspect of, not all's right in this world. But if we look at that just from from a psychological lens, then it's that necessary, kind of journey into the dark, into the forest, into the whale's belly, that I think we all take at some point in our lives, when the paradoxes or contradictions in the self become so great that the only way to try to resolve them is to face them.
The look of Dark City, for some reason, reminded me the look of Gotham City in Batman, and that's a movie that Batman series has been a movie I've always been drawn to. So, and I connected it in that way. One of the other interesting characters in this movie is William Hurt, the detective Bumstead, who's really trying to solve a serial killing that's gone on, and they're trying to pin this on Rufus Sewell. So, what's the significance of the William Hurt character? What would you say about him?
He's interesting because, we have these individuals like, John Murdoch, who, kind of wake up in the middle of the stranger's attempt to imprint him. But we have a character like Inspector Bumstead, who isn't really awake fully yet to what's going on. He hasn't had this kind of abrupt kind of waking up. I think his waking up is kind of more gradual, right? It takes kind of his careful, detail-oriented, almost rational kind of approach takes it to crumble almost before he can really um, come to consciousness, I suppose, come to awareness of what's going on in the city. And I think, John Murdoch's character, the other characters actually as well, um, Emma, right?
Yeah, talk about Emma. That's
Yeah,
Murdoch's wife.
also play a part in that, right? Uh, so this raises the question of what truth is and what sanity is, and whether we can pin those questions down to the specific individual, or whether truth is not subjective but collective, right? Yeah, so for Bumstead, you know, it's a different path to consciousness, but the other characters, kind of slowly, help him see the light as they collectively begin to piece together the puzzle of what's happening, right?
There's another character we talked about, characters representing other characters. The Sewell, gosh, I can't say his name. Rufus Sewell character, the John Murdoch character,
Mm.
has an uncle Carl, and you
Yeah.
pointed out that that was significance, and he figures in the movie because uh, uh, the Murdoch John Murdoch character hooks up with his uncle Carl. What's the significance of the name Carl to you in this movie?
Well, as I started looking at the reflecting on the names of the characters, I just noticed that, of course, one thinks about Carl Jung, and with Emma, one thinks about Carl Jung's wife, Emma Jung.
Oh,
Um,
that was her name. I didn't realize that.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know if there's much significance to that, but what's more significant in terms of Uncle Carl is the fact that he um, is seemingly the proprietor of this aquarium, right? Forget the name of the aquarium. It was called Neptune's Kingdom,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Right. So again, we have there's this whole theme of water in the film, and often depictions of the underworld are depictions that take place in the ocean, right? Underwater in the depths of the ocean. Uh, so, again, this is kind of a reminder of of the film's attempt to get us to look at this question of the unconscious, right? So, Uncle Carl is living in this kind of aquarium. In the film, you see all these fish tanks, right, at his place. Um, and right in the beginning of the film, when John Murdoch he wakes up in a bathtub.
Yes, that's right.
So
He
he's
does.
kind of in water, right? He's in moisture. The strangers hate moisture, by the way.
Right.
We could talk
They
about,
can't be around
that
water.
connection, but Murdoch wakes up in the water. Um, so this fact that he's waking up in the water suggests that he's, in contact somehow with the unconscious, right? He's somehow in contact with the soul. He gets out of the bathtub, and um, a fish tank breaks, and there's this little goldfish swimming
Right
around,
on the floor. On the
flopping
floor.
around on the floor.
Yeah.
And, the whole question at this point is, later we learn the whole question is whether Murdoch's a murderer or not. But he picks up this fish that's flopping around the floor, and he puts it back in the bathtub, which becomes significant later as Bumstead is trying to determine whether this guy's the killer of these prostitutes or not. Um, but if we think about the goldfish symbolically, it's this luminescent creature, right? And before there were humans, on land, there were fish in the ocean. So it's also this primordial creature. And Jung often talks about the archetypes of the unconscious coming from the primordial depths, right? So something elemental or something fundamental in us that makes us human that we've had, since we've been walking on the earth, but maybe before, right? So the idea of this goldfish glistening, in this dark place calls to mind the kind of idea of awakening, the awakening of the unconscious. So Uncle Carl's um, Neptune's kingdom, right? Again, just suggests, people can look into this more, suggests, this underworld kind of journey that Murdoch is on, and all the characters really in the film are on to um, find the soul, or at least to realize the soul, through confronting the unconscious. So yeah, it's just like great symbology, great metaphors, I think, that pay, returning to and reflecting on.
The other couple of things I was thinking of from a symbolic standpoint is John Murdoch and the strangers have this talent, I guess if you want to call it, or ability to tune, which is really sounds like psychokinesis. They can alter environments, and Murdoch discovers that not only do the strangers have this ability that he does. What's the significance of this tuning in your analysis of the movie?
I don't know. I think like psychokinesis is probably your territory, right? Um, but at the very minimum, I think it suggests the idea of agency, in the world. Um, this may be dramatized in the film as psychokinesis, the ability to change one's environment. Um, but just from the simple kind of idea of agency, the idea that we can have some kind of influence on our world, on our surroundings, on our relationships, in terms of our knowledge and our understandings. Um, the way that it's presented in the film is this kind of liberating kind of power in the hands of John Murdoch, right? The strangers are certainly using it for nefarious purposes, which is possible too. But Murdoch, um, as he comes to understand that he has these powers, and power is always a kind of a funny thing, depending on whose hands it's in, but
Either for good or bad.
for good or bad.
Yeah.
Um, Murdoch, as he discovers what's really going on in the dark city, uses it actually to liberate himself and others from the strangers. So, and in doing so, he liberates himself in a way, right? He's no longer, tied to these memories uh, that have been given to him in a syringe. He's no longer tied to the ideas that have been kind of imparted to him by the strangers. He's now free to, kind of make the world as he sees fit, right?
Mhm.
So, I think there's a liberatory kind of aspect to the film. You might think of it in kind of decolonial, kind of ways, right? The people in Dark City are kind of slaves, right? In a certain respect to the whims of the strangers and the strangers' needs, right? And the strangers' aims instead of their own. And so, John gets their power, and we see later on that he uh, has a desire to make the city, in an image that's more conducive to human beings and not so much to the strangers who I gather end up dying at the end, right?
What's the significance, if any, of Shell Beach? Allegedly, that's where Murdoch grew up, and there are several references in uh, in the film to Shell Beach. And an interesting thing is that if the Murdoch character asks people about Shell Beach and how to get there, no one can tell him how to get there. What do you think the significance of that is?
Yeah, nobody can tell him to get there. It seems to be, a place that's a complete fabrication. Um, the interesting question the whole film is whether, it's our memories that make us who we are, right? Our individual memories and of our experiences. And so Shell Beach kind of serves as this reminder, of kind of the idea that perhaps, all we need to be individuals is a memory of a certain place, right? I think that's misguided. Obviously, in the film, I think we learn that the soul is more than just individual memories. Um, but it is interesting that Shell Beach and a couple of other places, Neptune's Palace or Neptune's Kingdom. I think there's at the end of the film, the kind of generic hotel turns into the Fremont. That these places have uh, uh, kind of specific kind of creative names, right? They're metaphorical names versus kind of generic names. So, I'm kind of wondering the significance of that, right? All the other places in the town are generically named,
Right.
but Shell Beach isn't. And I can't really make sense of that. Why that's the case. Um, yeah. If
I
I throw
guess
that question back at what you think about that.
well, I mean, that's perplexing to me because I guess I viewed Shoal Beach as more of a symbol than an actual place.
Hmm.
And kind of like you were talking about, trying to get back to your roots or understand. If you to understand who you are, you kind of have to understand where you came from. And
Sure.
I don't know. That's where Shell Beach resonated with me, but I don't know if that's what Alex Proyas suggested it be. What other things about Dark City you find metaphorical or interesting? There are other aspects that we haven't addressed.
Um, I think one of the other kind of symbols or kind of archetypal images are the spirals. Mhm. So
Because
right at
there's
the beginning
spark.
of the film, we see the spirals and, it's part of the strangers kind of mechanism that helps them change the city with their minds are the gears. And we see, clocks revolving around all the time. So it calls to mind this kind of archetypal image of the spiral. Right?
And it seems to me there's in the opening scene with Murdoch while he's wandering around the apartment, he sees the body of a woman and she has some spirals carved in her body. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, in the film, a number of prostitutes are murdered. Um, from our standpoint, they appear to be kind of ritual murders, and yeah, on the bodies of the women, there are spirals carved into the bodies. Um, um, there's who's the investigator, the police investigator that goes crazy.
Yeah, and I
What's his
don't know
name?
who the actor is. I think the
Um,
name in Walensky.
Walensky.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know who the actor was. I don't
I don't know
remember
who the
that.
actor is either, but he's locked up in his room. We see him, drawing spirals all over the place, right? Um, and then later we see, spiral fingerprints on John Murdoch as well. So this symbol repeats, quite often throughout the film, and I think it can mean a couple different things, right? From Walensky's standpoint, um, it seems to symbolize this idea of being trapped in the city,
Hmm.
right? There's no way out, right? So we can think about kind of the Nietzschean idea of the eternal return, right? That we're always coming back to where we started, right? There's no kind of escaping the circularity of time, right? Or in the case of this film of place, right? Walensky was the other character that is kind of woken up in the middle of the imprinting um, from the strangers, and yet, he's not able to, kind of integrate his understandings, and so he's slowly, kind of going insane. But what it recognizes, through trying to, get to Shell Beach or trying to get out of the city is
Uh-huh.
is that there is no out, right? There is no way out. Um, so, the spiral can represent the maze, it can represent the labyrinth, right? And it can represent the the obstacles on the path to individuation, right? In Walensky's case, he's not able to overcome those obstacles, right? And so he is trapped in a sense. He's trapped in his own, you know, mind. For others, the spiral can be the path to the center, right? If we spiral all the way in, we get to the core,
Yeah, the core.
we get to the self, we get to the center. Whether again of the self or of the world, the axis mundi, right? The center of the cosmos, right? Um, so that can be, liberatory potentially, right? If we're able to navigate, you know, out of the maze. We see that nice scene when Emma goes to visit Dr. Schreiber,
Shiver. Yeah,
and he has the maze
right.
or that spiral kind of labyrinth, and the mouse or the rat is running around in it, right? It makes us think of the larger kind of experiment that's going on with the people in Dark City. So we have the kind of microcosm of the mouse trying to navigate the spiral, and at the same time we have the macrocosm of the people, mostly unsuccessfully, navigating that. Um, but interestingly, at the end of the film, Schreiber and Murdoch and Bumstead, they decide, well, Murdoch and Bumstead decide that they're going to finally, find Shell Beach, try to find Shell Beach. And so what they do, they, you know, uh, get in a little boat, they take that dark sea journey,
Right.
yeah, and then they, um, you know, come to this dead end of this building where there's a poster of Shell Beach.
Shell Beach, right?
Yeah. So it's the Shell Beach that's still in the cave of the unconscious, if we're using a Platonic metaphor, right? Um,
Yeah, and maybe
and they
because
break through. Yeah.
there might be people out there that don't understand that reference. So when Plato was talking about the cave, what was he talking about?
Well, he was talking about the different kind of levels of consciousness or ability to understand reality, right? So we have, in the cave allegory, we have, these slaves that are shackled and they're looking at this wall and in front of them, and these projected shadows of these figures that are behind them are moving across the wall, and they take that to be the real, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it's just shadow, it's imagination, right? And for Plato, the real is not to be found there in the material world. The real is to be found in the world of the true Platonic forms. But that requires the power of the sun, the power of the rational mind, to be able to see it. Um, but in this film, the rational mind might actually prevent one from from seeing the real, right? So in the case of Bumstead, for example, his rational mind resists uh, to some degree initially from accepting, kind of the story that Murdoch is giving him about these dark figures and how they're controlling the city, and it's a question of why nobody can remember, spending any time in the daylight, and
Right,
why
right.
nobody can remember, how to get to Shell Beach. Um, so in some ways, the film is an argument about this idea that what makes us human is our higher rational abilities, right? Maybe there's more to it than that.
So if you were going to give our viewers, our listeners, a reason to see Dark City, what would that be? It's not just a science fiction movie, which it is, but what's the deeper reason to see uh, Dark City from your standpoint?
I mean, primarily, I just think it's a fun film. It's stylistically very interesting. It deals with subject matter, about the soul, right? About, identity, about consciousness that I think are compelling. Um, but one can also just enjoy the film if one likes this sort of genre. I think if people like film noir, they'll enjoy this film. If they like science fiction or speculative fiction, they will enjoy this film. Um, but obviously, one can take it deeper if one chooses,
Right.
right? And, look at the archetypal significance, look at the mythological significance. Um, Ideally, a film like this does make us, you know, um, think, right? And, uh, think both critically and creatively about our own world and how it's being shaped, and, you know, how we're moving through it, and how we make sense of our experiences as human beings. And you know, hopefully, we become better human beings because of that, which is what I think all good art kind of aspires to, is to bring us into contact with the soul, right? So on the kind of the meta level, this question of what the human soul is, I think the film does a really good job of kind of exploring that question in all of its depths, and it gives us interesting, um, mythological, in-depth psychological, archetypal tools to have the language, and the imagery to explore those questions deeper if we choose to.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the power of of the symbol, right? Of the image, is that it gives us another tool besides language, besides experience, besides logic, to be able to ask those questions. What does it mean to be human, right?
You
Are we
know,
fulfilling that? Are we fulfilling the potential that's inherent in being human?
and I don't know what the answer to that question is. I have to think about that on a daily basis. You own a copy. You own a copy of Dark City, don't you? I do. And if other people are looking for a place to watch it for free, Tubi, Tubi, I've watched it on that platform. So if you're looking for a place to watch Dark City, there's a place to do that without going ahead and buying it. Although I'm not telling you shouldn't buy it if you like it, but that's just a way to
Yeah,
get
it's free
exposed
on
to it.
free on Fubi. Yeah, I think you
Yeah,
can get it on other platforms for, I think it's a few bucks, right, to actually purchase, a streaming version of it
yeah.
online.
I thought
So
of
yeah.
Tubi because that's free. So I was thinking from a budget standpoint kind of thing. Well, what else? Anything else we should say about Dark City? And both you and I are fans of the film and Alex Price. Is there anything else we should say?
Well, I think there are tons of things to say, but we have only, what, an hour to do this. So I think the other interesting thing is that Dark City comes out about a year before The Matrix.
Yes, I'd forgotten that connection. Talk about that a little bit, why that's significant.
Well, I just think there are just interesting to see that there are common themes, right? In terms of, the liberating of consciousness comes to mind. The whole kind of mood of the films, the aesthetics of the films strike me as very similar. Um, and this idea that one has to go through this process of kind of waking up, right, in order to liberate, oneself from whatever, right? In the Matrix, it's the agents, right?
Right.
That he is trying to liberate himself from, and the rest of humanity actually are all enslaved, as kind of a power plant for this Matrix uh, software projection, right? So, everybody's reality is in their minds, and very similar themes in Dark City, right? So it's kind of this dystopic begins as this dystopic novel, and we have this protagonist that kind of uh, wakes up during the process of the film and goes on to liberate, the other people in the film. So I just think it's like an interesting coincidence that both these films, kind of came out very, close to each other.
About a year apart, I think. I don't remember exact dates, but it seemed like they were
Yeah, it
that
was
pretty close.
98 for Dark City and
And
99
then and for
for
the
The Matrix.
Matrix.
I don't
Uh-huh.
remember the
Yeah.
months. Um, but it's almost as if, there is something in, what Jung calls the collective unconscious that is, manifesting these things in the world. Um, Manifesting these two films that both deal with similar subjects. They both speak to kind of fundamental questions of what it means to be human.
Yes, very much so.
Uh,
And what reality is, that's the thing as a former sociology guy, that's what interests me. What is reality?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was reality, at the end of Dark City, you know, John's starting to remake things, and one of the strangers, is kind of dying, but he's kind of, there and confronts John and um, wants to know, what John feels like, and he's desperate to know, what it means to be human. John tells him, that he was looking in the wrong place, right? And then he points to his head and he says, "You're not going to find, you know, the soul up there in the mind. So where are we going to find it?" Um, you know, James Hillman is another kind of person who is in the depth psychological kind of matrix or field. He's known as the kind of inventor of archetypal psychology, which is kind of a post-Jungian depth psychology. Uh, and I think it was in his book Revisioning Psychology, and um, he kind of asked this question about the soul and um, suggests that the typical kind of question that we have about the soul is what is the soul? And Hillman suggests that that's the wrong question, really. And he suggests that perhaps we don't need to ask that question as much as just recognize that the soul is, right? It's in our experiences, you know. It's in our memories certainly, but it's in our relationships, and it's in the process of being where we find the soul. It's in the process of living where we find the soul, so that it's not necessarily a thing, and it's not necessarily located, in any particular place. It's a phenomenon, right? It's phenomenological, right? It's manifests out of experience. So I thought that was a kind of a powerful way of thinking about Dark City, is that the strangers, they inhabit these corpses. They lack perhaps a kind of an anima aspect of their own consciousness. Um, they're kind of soulless in a way. Uh,
Mhm.
and they have this kind of scientific kind of approach, this materialist approach to identifying and locating the soul, this empirical approach to identifying the soul, but it's not really working, right? And the reason it doesn't work, perhaps, is because, you know, we only notice the soul through living, through our
I think
experiences.
I think Dark City is important for several reasons. A symbolic reason that we've talked a lot about in this episode of Anomalies, but then I think it's just a pretty good sci-fi movie. I just enjoyed it as the tone of it and the characters. I just thought that drew me in. So I really appreciate you wanting to talk about it. And like you said, it's out there probably on streaming platforms. People want to watch it, or like I said, I saw it recently on Tubi for free. So, Dan, I just appreciate spending time with you. Good to see you again. We'll have to get together. I know that's been something that's been in the works, but thanks for
Sure.
your time and thanks for your perspectives.
Appreciate it. Thanks for
All
having me
right.
on the program, and it's great spending time with you and talking about this fun film.